First of all, thank you, Chairperson Lofgren, and I want to thank Ranking Member Davis. I served for a decade on the House Administration Committee, so it's kind of fun to be back and be part of this process. I think learning by video is very good and very useful. I think trying to govern by video is a disaster. And the key factor is not going to be all the technology we hear about today. The key factor is how human beings learn and the pattern of the collective dialogue, which makes up a legislative body, and how over time its members become collectively smarter by interacting with each other. The founding fathers were virtually all members of legislatures before they created the United States. And they believed in the legislature. In fact, if you look at the Constitution, the legislative branch is first and has a long section devoted to the House and Senate before they get around to the executive branch. The Federalist Papers make very clear that they thought a legislative parliament meeting on a regular basis was a key to protecting freedom. And the reason they thought that is that they had studied carefully the rise of Cromwell as a dictator during the English Civil War. And they were very frightened that an executive branch that didn't have a vigorous legislative body would always be a danger and a threat to our freedom. So their view was that you had to have people who got together regularly. They had to bond together. They had to be prepared to do things, to learn from each other, and to communicate. I remember when I used to be on the House floor, during the course of one or two votes, you could see 8, 10, 12, 15 different people learn about things all across the country. So I want to emphasize for my part, not the technology. You'll hear a lot about technology today, although with all the various hacking, I'd be worried about it. But I don't worry about technology. I worry about history and the nature of human institutions. And I think they require us to physically be together regularly. I just say that I think there are 3 severe consequences of going to any kind of remote system. The first, as a former speaker who has been accused on occasion of being very powerful, I think when everybody else is out of town, the speaker and their staff become virtually a dictatorship because they have all the power, they have all the ability to deal with the executive branch, to deal with the Senate. And I think it puts the average member at an enormous disadvantage. Second, the individual members are isolated. Oh, they may communicate back and forth, but there's an enormous power biologically in people being physically together. And that's why I want to emphasize, if you study history, going back to the Greeks, the Romans, coming up through the Middle Ages, you'll see why the rise of legislative bodies, whether it was the Roman Senate or it was the British Parliament, why these institutions always involve people coming into a room, meeting with each other, bonding, sharing ideas, and it's a very central thing. I think third, the legislation will be less well thought through. There is an enormous power to the legislative process as it improves, as different members bring in ideas, as different people find things that are wrong. That process really matters. And the legislative product gets to be dramatically better the more there's a systematic legislative process. And I think that the natural pattern of having remote voting will be to dramatically weaken that process. Lastly, I guess I want to challenge what I sense is an absurd level of fear. And because close as the ambassador of the Vatican, I've been living in Rome. We've lived through the pandemic. Italy closed down. There was a crisis comparable to New York City. But I'm very worried by the level of fear that I sense in the United States and this sense of danger. We used to sing, we're the land of the brave and the home of the free. I sense we're beginning to be the land of the timid and the home of the fearful. And I recently wrote Franklin Delano Roosevelt's great admonition that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. I think the idea that politicians are too precious to come together at a time, as you pointed out, Chairperson Lofgren, truck drivers, people who run grocery stores, people who work in restaurants, the number of Americans every day who are going about their business. You can be prudent, you can wear a mask, you can have social distancing. But this idea that the current challenge leads us into a radical disruption of 3,000 years of legislative history, I think is a very, very sad commentary on the American system. Politicians are not more important than truck drivers. they're not more important than nurses, or they're not more important than, frankly, people who work in a restaurant or at Walmart or at a grocery store. So I wish you would drop this sense of panic, relax, figure out how to get together in a healthy way, and show the country by example that we can, in fact, function even under this challenge. Thank you for giving me a couple seconds more than my time.
Thank you, Mr. Gingrich.